state, that we wouldn't let them back. A number of legal authorities then said, I don't think you can get away with that. He was asked there and said he still thought it was legally permissible and they were looking into it. What do we know?
Well, I've been asking a lot of people about this to try and ask, why is the government thinking there's even a possibility of this? And the reasons I'm getting are several. One is the law on this is not clear. There's not much case law on it. There's an awful lot of stuff. There's uncertainty as to exactly what courts would or would not say if it were to be tested in the court. So the first point is there's uncertainty because it's not clear about whether you're talking about UN conventions, whether you're talking about European law, domestic law. So there's a degree of uncertainty. The second point is that there's a document called the 1961 Convention on the Reduction of Statelessness, which was a UN convention which basically said don't make people stateless. However, it contains exceptions. It says there are certain circumstances when states can render somebody stateless. Essentially, if you have given, I think the phrase is, have you done something seriously prejudicial to your own state? Now, the question is, and what the government is looking at is, does that exception give them some room for manoeuvre? Are there any areas where potentially you could? And I thought the Prime Minister in Prime Minister Questions Day gave us one clue to that. He talked about the abhorrence of people who leave the UK and go and pledge allegiance to another country. And now, the point is, if at some point we reach a stage where the caliphate, Islamic State, is in any way given recognised legal status, then that could become the state to which somebody could be deprived of their British citizenship and said, right, you've supported that state, that is now your state. So that's why the government is looking at that. Yes, is it hugely difficult? Yes, they also say that. But the Prime Minister believes that it's possible.
Emily Thornberry, if it was possible to stop these people from coming back in, shouldn't we do it?
It's not possible.
But if it was possible, shouldn't we do it?
I don't know what lawyers he's been talking to. I mean, it is not what David Anderson says, and he's supposed to be their advisor on terrorism. And to be honest, we had earlier a discussion about the importance of international law, about putting people up for trial. You cannot pick and choose which
actually,
laws
most
you
people
want.
watching this programme will be less concerned about international law and more concerned that these people who have beheaded fellow American and British citizens are going to come back and do us harm. The niceties of international law are a dripping roast for lawyers like yourself, but they don't keep us safe on the streets of this country. So the reason I ask you is, if it was possible to stop these people from coming back in, shouldn't we try to do it?
This is supposed to be a battle between ideologies, right? What we stand for.
No, it's a battle to keep our streets safe.
But we're also talking about it in terms of battle of ideologies, and we are not to lose our central ideology as a result. The Prime Minister himself said about the importance of the rule of law.
What ideology?
The rule of law is the rule of law. If they were...
The rule of law is to keep these streets and our people safe.
Absolutely.
In our undergrounds, our buses, our schools, our churches and our mosques.
And
not some UN convention that no one knows about. And if these people have pledged allegiance to another state, the Islamic State, why should they be let back into this country?
We should use the protection of law. Of course we should. We should prosecute these people for, as people have been saying, for treason. There's a number of things. If people have been out waging war elsewhere, we should put them on trial in this country. We cannot have, across the world, it is no good for any country for there to be a group of people who are stateless. We cannot do that. It does no good for us. And if we start pulling back...
But they're not stateless. They pledged allegiance to the Islamic State. If that's what they like, let them stay there. Don't let them back into this country. What could be wrong with that?
The Islamic State is not a recognised state. We're a long way from what James is talking about that. Yes, but what are you saying? So you're saying we should start giving up on people's nationality. We will then have other countries doing it as well. When we try to send back people who we don't want on these shores,
surely we're going to,
people will say we're not having them.
Emily Thornberry, I think a lot of people watching this programme will think...
A lot of people watching this programme will feel that I'm not getting a word in edgeways.
If people are coming back to bomb us, why should they get their nationality back?
I understand that, but the fact of the matter is that you cannot start making people stateless.
Why?
If you do, there will be anarchy, because all countries will start saying, I don't like the look of you, we're getting rid of your nationality. Where will all these people end up?
But they wouldn't be stateless, they would be members of the Islamic State.
Great. So what you're saying is that we should start chucking out people who we don't like the look of. They'll end up in an Islamic State who will have nothing to lose but to fight for that state.
Can I just point out, Emily Thornberry, we haven't chucked them out. They went there of their own volition to form a caliphate of medieval barbarity. So therefore, why should we let them back in?
I'm not saying that anyone wants to let them in. I'm not saying I have any sympathy with it. But what I'm saying is the law is the law. We are signed up. We have been since 1966. We have agreed with the rest of the world. There has been an agreement that you cannot make people stateless because it is no good for any individual country or the welfare of the world.
Even if they want to come back and blow up their fellow
then we
citizens.
arrest them, and then we can put them under control orders, and then we can prosecute them, and then we can do them for treason.
Well, excuse me, that didn't work in 7/7. The people who carried out 7/7, some of them were trained in terrorist camps in Afghanistan and came back and did us harm.
Yes. And what we have to do is we have to focus on making sure that we can gather evidence and bring them to law, because in the end, the law is a protection for all of us. The law is more important than anything else and can protect us. And we must not be undermining it by putting out, in my view, superficial briefings across a weekend in order to be able to get a political hit on something which is not sustainable in law.
I want to bring Matthew Hancock in on one thing, but just one final thing. You think it's a great affront to human rights that we don't let these people who want to do us harm back into the country.
And yet
you are prepared to put them under some kind of form of internal exile, which is what your control orders would do. You would move them to parts of the country under internal exile. Why is that not an affront to human rights, but not letting them back in is?
Because if someone has a British nationality, we cannot start unpicking an international agreement that has stood good for 50 years and has protected us all.
Since when was internal exile part of our human rights?
It's a compromise that needs to be made.
Oh,
right?
so
it's a compromise that needs to be made. Of course, you have to make a compromise, because in the end, it is the duty of a statesperson more than anything else to protect its citizens. But the main way in which you protect citizens is by having a respect for the law.
Matthew Hancock, is this now under serious consideration, given the number of legal authorities and also the voice of your Lib Dem coalition parties, that is not a runner?
Well, I think the first thing I can say is thank goodness Emily isn't the Attorney General, because we need to look at all options.
And thank goodness Dominic Grieve isn't the Attorney General, because he agrees with me on this.
If I can just finish, thanks. We need to look to do everything we can to protect British citizens. That is the first duty of any government. And if that requires changing the law, then of course we should change the law. And if that requires looking into the detail of long-standing international agreements, then we need to do that. But should we explore every option to be able to keep people who have gone and declared their allegiance to an international body that likes to think of itself as a state, although not recognised as a state, absolutely we should, because the priority for everybody in government has to be to protect British citizens on these shores. Now, is that difficult? Yes, it may well be difficult, but should it be seriously considered and not thrown away as an idea? Of course it should.
I think that hold on, let me ask you this. Has this government got if you're going to go down that road, and you've heard from Emily Thornberry the huge roadblocks that are in the way of that, does this government really have the backbone to take on the British legal establishment, the European legal establishment, and the United Nations legal establishment?
Well, there are areas like this where we have already made progress. For instance, getting rid of Abu Qatada and others, where we were told for years that this wasn't possible legally, and Theresa May managed to do it. And so
that's one person. This is a principle, as Emily Thornberry has said.
That's one.
And these are three major establishments. I ask again, have you really got the backbone to take on these three powerful establishments?
Do we have the backbone to protect British citizens on the streets in Britain? Absolutely we do. And we're not going to be put off by some automatic knee-jerk negativism. But I think that the single thing that was most important that came out of PMQs actually was the full support from the Labour leader for the action that we're taking. He used the phrase.
I don't know what you're going to do.
No, well, actually, let's be fair. He said, "That's interesting, Prime Minister. We will look at what you come up with."
He was very clear that he said, "We will give the government our full support in the principle of this," and that was much stronger language than he's used in the past.
Let me just show back with you, James. My instinct is, because it's very interesting what you said about the nuances and the potential loopholes and possible ways round, But my instinct is that when they look at this, they'll decide it's actually a mountain too high to climb.
Yes, and one reason why I hate to mention it is Europe. I mean, one lawyer said to me that there is a European dimension to this, which is there is now a legal concept of EU nationality. And there is a fear that if you render somebody stateless and you say you are no longer a British citizen, they could go to the courts and claim that, no, I am an EU citizen, and by depriving me of my my British citizenship, you're depriving me of my EU citizenship, and that becomes a matter for the European courts.
Though we should remember that the Germans and the French and the Spanish and the Italians face the same problem.
Yes.
James, thank you very much.